Guys, intro time.
Wait, which intro?
The wisdom check.
Oh, good.
Wait, no. I thought we were keeping the old intro. What's wrong with the old one? People like that one.
It was too long.
Yeah.
Too many fucking gifs.
Yeah.
Yeah, but can we keep the part where I yell,
More?
No. But it's the intro to end all intros.
I got, like, what? 2 lines last time?
Do you want more lines, Tim?
Well, no, not really.
In a world without answers.
Yeah.
Wait, you want to start with that?
Here we go. Exactly like last time.
Wait, okay, so we're doing it the exact same way? Let's start with the Smoky Bar.
No. It's a new season. We have to have a new intro.
More.
Not sure why we thought this would go any differently.
Oh, well. Welcome, everyone, to the Wisdom Check, where Jeff and Dustin welcome a guest every week to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. Welcome.
This is ridiculous. I'm starting the stream now.
Wait, where's my die at? Well, we can't start until I botch. And it's not an intro unless I'm botching.
You're on.
All right. Hello, welcome everybody to the Wisdom Check. I am Dustin, and over there on the other side of the screen from me, again this week, is Jeff. And joining us in the seat of honor this week is Bert, goes by Bislab, find him a lot of places, who is the DM for the podcast Steam, Steal, and Murder. And we wanted to do a little talk about podcasting today, and when I thought about who I was going to have come on, I remember Bert told me that they've been podcasting now for 10 years.
That's a lot of years.
Predates Critical Role, predates Roll20. Like that's reaching way back there a bit. So congratulations on making 10 years first off.
Yeah.
And,
November 6th, 2009 was the first episode.
And so we're going to talk a lot about that, obviously, but also just right off the bat here as well. Happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday, man.
So
1 year closer to death. Awesome.
Well, hopefully we'll have a good one tonight. I mean, make that worthy of a birthday, at least for the next couple hours.
We're going to go back even further, though. We want to start with how you got into the hobby just in general. So before you started podcasting, probably way back, how far back into the hobby did you go? Were you there at the beginning? I mean, how far back do you go, Bert?
Well, the first set I ran across was one of the wood grain 3 booklet boxes. Very first version of Dungeons and Dragons. It was actually in my father's collection of stuff when he was in the Navy, and I don't believe he even knew what it was. Wow. He just picked it up somewhere, and I started looking through it. But I really didn't start playing until BX edition, Basic Expert edition box sets came out. So like most people in this relative age of mine, started with Redbox.
Yeah, that's the answer we usually get. So when you said a wood grain box from before that, I was like, of course, Bert would be the one guy who didn't start with the red box.
No, that's what stoked the fires, though, right?
That's
just
pretty amazing.
Reading through those and just, what the heck is this?
So was it always Dungeons and Dragons, or did you make jump to something else?
No, Dungeons and Dragons started it again with the BX set. Sorry, my voice is a little congested tonight, apparently. Call of Cthulhu was probably the next. I really dug that. I was really big into the mood, the environment, and the story of the game early on. And that certainly wasn't something covered by very early Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, yeah, for sure, yeah.
Little Black Book Traveler, first Traveler edition was definitely into that. And the whole early TSR line, Star Frontiers, Gamma World, Marvel, Boot Hill, Top Secret. Man, I hit them all.
God, it's been a long time since I've played any of those. Top Secret was a big one. I remember Traveler being big. Run into those games pretty frequently. But it's probably not one a lot of people in the chat know about.
It was hard to find players for some of those games. Even if you found people who played, it was always they wanted to play D&D. And I find that even to somewhat be true now with the 5e crowd. Like, they want to play 5e, they have not yet got brave enough to venture off the Dungeons and Dragons path. Did you find that was true even way back then?
No, not really, to be honest, because during the height of the Dungeons and Dragons is the devil work. Everyone openly played Marvel Boot Heel Top Secret because it didn't have the stigma. So there was a lot of that going on.
So it was a way for you to play role-playing games without mom and dad getting mad at you.
Oh yeah. We played them in the school libraries. The first time we tried it was actually RuneQuest, one of the early versions of RuneQuest. We played in the library at our school, and it was confiscated because it was too close to that devil Dungeons and Dragons. So we brought in Boot Hill the next game. They're like, "Oh, Westerns, okay."
Wow, it's amazing what a reskin does for you, right?
We played Boot Hill just like we played Dungeons and Dragons, though. So it wasn't a lot of difference.
I guess it's just all the monster manual really set it off.
Yeah,
maybe something like the summon spells or something.
Oh, that and your nudie pics of succubi and whatnot that was in that first copy of the hardback dungeon monster manual.
Yep. God, man.
It didn't hurt.
Well, after we talked to some of the original, artists that we had on here, like Larry Elmore, and he talked about some of his inspirations of how he did his art. Makes sense. Quite a few of those heavy metal kind of style artworks there with a little risque imagery.
Oh, definitely. I think there was a strong metal influence in early.
Oh yeah. Let's see. So when you kind of got into it, you did kind of dip into those other games, and it sounds pretty interesting. How you said 10 years ago you started with that podcast. I mean, did you originally start with one of these sorts of games here?
No, not at all. Yeah? So the name of Steam, Steal, and Murder was the name of the first campaign we ran. Okay, so it's based on the Fate or Fudge engine with some details. At the time, Evil Hat was running a beta test, or even earlier, the beta really, of the Dresden Files role-playing game, right?
Oh, wow.
And my group was in on that original play test for that game.
Wow.
Spirit of the Century came out of that, a few other things. But that's what we started with, is like the very basic rules of Fate that became those other games. And it was steampunk America setting. And it was based on like murder mysteries like Murder, She Wrote, where every episode was a murder or some befuddling mystery, and it's up to the characters to figure it out.
And you ran
never told them if they got it right.
And you ran it like episodic.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
that's cool.
Man, so that was for the first several years, with the exception of Halloween episodes where we would do side games or a play test here and there. We did a lot of play testing for various companies. That's what we ran for the first few years. And from there, we hit Savage Worlds hard. We did a year and a half worth of Deadlands. And just anything we can get our hands on, and I can get enough people interested in.
That's pretty cool.
Was it hard getting people interested in podcasting? Like a lot of gamers, they were cool with being gamers around other gamers, but then to put themselves out there in any kind of format, it was kind of hard, I think, to get people pushed into that sort of stuff. Did you have problems with players?
No, actually, my first Blair base, pardon, I was playing in one of the first actual play games, although at the time it wasn't really podcasted. It was up for links you could just download and listen to. Good buddy of mine, Logan Horsford, was running what is it called? Oh my gosh, I can't remember. He was running a Cthulhu game, a modern Cthulhu game that had been going on for a while, and I started playing. And a bunch of those players came over and with me to Steam, Steal, and Murder. And one of the things that Logan did was he would ask people in the audience that were listening, he's like, "You want to play? Send me an email. We'll give you a try. We'll give it a shot." And, and I did the same. We picked up players from just our audience. Some of them lasted a really long time, years and years. Some of them played for a few games. Some of the current crew of Steam, Steal, and Murder are still there from the very beginning.
Wow.
Still going strong.
That's fantastic.
That's amazing.
Now, you were talking about doing a lot of play tests originally. It sounded like you were getting them directly from the companies. Were they seeking you out specifically? Had you already kind of established yourself to that extent?
Yes, so I've done some industry work. I've got credits in some of the really early White Wolf games, particularly Changeling Second Edition.
Nice.
Did some. This is old world of darkness. Not current. Did playtesting for that. Did a little bit of fluff fiction. Did a lot of editing work on smaller games here and there. Still do that today. I'm doing a lot of work with the DCC crowd nowadays. Cool. Yeah. But Pelgrane Press, they send out a little newsletter where they ask for interested parties to playtest. And my crew's gotten several of their adventure modules and games that we've gone through and playtested. You guys have played Capers? It's a pretty big game right now by Craig
I've been
Campbell.
wanting to play. Matt's rolled it around a few times on DMG for us, and we haven't made it happen yet. But
yeah, great game. Play tested just about everything he's came out with. He's a great guy. He makes really good games. But yeah, where we're able to, a lot of the companies asked us to not release them as a podcast, so we recorded them, gave the recordings to the companies to listen to see, what happened at the table.
Yeah, dissect it out a little bit.
Yeah, some of them asked for them not to be released. Many more though, we're fine with it. We're very much fine with it.
That's funny. Yeah, I can only imagine some of the things, at that point in time, what gaming was. I could only imagine some of the things that probably came up in some of those games.
We have 400 published sessions on the Steam Steel and Murder podcast, and there are 237 more that never made it to the podcast. Wow! And I've got several in the can that just need to be edited and can go out. We're never asked to not be.
Absolutely. So at this point, you probably got enough experience under your belt to give some advice on this. And I know there's a lot of people in our chat that are interested in, broadcasting Dungeons and Dragons or their other game that they're playing in some format. And for us, we're doing it obviously here on a stream. But there are some strengths to podcast formats, and there are definitely some things that work better or worse in those formats. So what are some examples you might have, just from your experience?
Pros and cons. You're looking for a little bit of both.
A little bit of both, yeah. If you got some.
I've been podcasting for a while, but I'm looking into doing some streaming. One of the pros I see on the streaming side is you guys have a lot better audience participation. There's a lot of feedback, be it positive, negative, or neutral. When you're doing a live stream, having that chat open is just a wonderful thing.
Yeah, we do love that.
There are certainly several podcasts that do have a very committed following that do a lot of communication back and forth. Mine was never one of them. Got metrics so that I know people are listening, and we certainly got players from those people that are listening, but hardly ever any feedback. Occasionally I'd get a question where a player just really wanted to know a listener really wanted to know whether or not the players got it right, like if they really solved the mystery, and they'd kind of shoot me an email saying like, I just want to know, I won't tell anybody.
Did you find it necessary to run like a side forum or a website?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh.
You had to have a place for them to communicate with you, because they can't do it directly through the podcast. So
right. Yeah. So in early days, RSS syndication, right? Used FeedBurner. Most people got it through Apple iTunes, right? So I had just a really basic web page up, that was like the primary thing with an email address. I guess there really wasn't a lot of easy ways to chat on web pages at the time.
Right.
There were few, but it required you to have special servers, you had to pay some money for, that sort of thing. We went to forums. Pro Boards is free forum out there. We used that for a long time.
Yep.
Eventually got a server and started running some, forum software. But forums were the way of communication for a very long time.
Oh, for sure.
A lot of places are still kind of using them. They're kind of dying out a lot now, but there's still a lot of places that are still using them.
Well, I tell you, Discord is what most people are using now, but one thing that Discord does not do well is threaded conversations. It's too easy to lose conversations, and I think that's where the boards shine.
Yeah, my MMO guild has that same fight every year about whether we can let our old engine website go.
Yeah,
and
there's got to be a way to hybridize that somehow.
We keep
I agree. But the technology has changed a lot. It's so incredibly easy now to get into podcasting and even streaming with just a modicum of talent with technology. When I first started, the way that we captured audio from everyone is I had a small mixer. One of the things you had to have was your mixer had to have an FX send, because you had to be able to send your microphone back into the computer and loop their audio back into the mixer.
Right.
And so the mixer would then be hooked up to a second computer that would do nothing but record the audio stream.
And that didn't cause a delay or anything?
It didn't. No, it was actually pretty good, but it had the fidelity of like a cassette deck.
Okay.
Editing was very hard because it all came through as one channel. So if you had one person that had a bad microphone, levels were all over the place. It's very hard. Then we found a little gadget called Levelator. It's still out there, although it's not being supported anymore. And Levelator did a good job of taking a single combined audio stream and leveling things out. I mean, of course, you could do it manually. Audacity existed back then. It was just rough. It was very rough. Man, I got to tell you, that's the worst thing of podcasting, though, is editing. As long as I've been doing it, I've only managed to cut my editing down to 1-to-1. So 1 hour of recorded time is 1 hour of editing.
That's actually pretty incredible, though. I mean, from just doing editing in my YouTube videos, it would take, 2-3 times the length to do a good edit. Whether you're going through just cleaning out the little things you say that you don't like to hear, your ums and your you knows and your who does and all that kind of stuff, or you had like. For me, it sounded like I was like a jet intake, when I was breathing, because I was like leveling things out. And God, it would take like 3 hours to edit something. It was like 40 minutes long, By the end of it, you're just like, I don't want to see it again.
Has a microphone a little too close to the mouth, and then their breathing is just captured for the whole thing. So in early days, you couldn't separate out the players.
Yep.
It was just one combined stream.
We got a loaded question in the chat for you, Bert. This is from, is it Kata Mondo first? Says, talk about Craig, Bert. Is that
Craig?
I don't know who. Well, welcome to the show here, Kata Mondo. I'm not particularly sure I'm familiar with you. I'm sure you must be one of Bert's followers here with the past. And
hey, John, how you doing, man?
I just wanted to make sure I didn't think Bert was watching, so I wanted to make sure he knew you were here and that you asked him about Craig. So.
Craig solved a lot of problems for podcasting. It's a little app that hooks up to your Discord server, and what it does that you could not get in most software, unless you paid a lot of money for it, is that it individualized everyone's microphone. Everybody's stream comes in on a separate channel. Nice. So if you have the one guy that has a crap microphone, you can just edit his channel. You can just pull out their breathing. It's a godsend. It's free. Craig definitely has a Patreon, however that is pronounced. But for a few bucks a month, you get a little extras with it. A backup recording server, for instance. It'll do a little audio editing. If you guys are using Audacity as your main audio editor, it downloads in Audacity format.
Wow. Well, I can already tell you got 2 new customers right away.
That Craig was going to be some a-hole player that you dealt with for years or something. And
no.
Craig's wonderful. Get you to just call him out or tell some funny story, and it's actually way more relevant to the podcast than I thought it was going to be when I brought it up.
We give a shout out to Craig almost every episode because Craig's got this tone when he joins your channel, probably because of certain states and nationalities having laws for recording, right? Mm-hmm. But he announces himself and he's got the creepiest voice. So we always give our props to Craig at the beginning. But yeah, there you go. For the changes in technology, that right there made anyone starting podcasting now, that will save you so much time. We started off Skype. That's what we used.
Yeah, we tried it. It was not very good.
Especially in the early days, because we would get dropouts, we would get bandwidth restrictions, all kinds of things. And as I said, I was using a mixer to record everything at the time. Later on, there was software that came out. Skype Recorder was a free one. Power Gramo was a good one for a while there, too. But all of them, single stream. You could not separate out the voices.
We don't want to interrupt you here much, Bert, but we got a lot of people asking for a link that we can drop in chat. If you could drop it here into the Whereby chat, I'll drop it into the stream chat for everybody else, because everyone is suddenly super interested in.
Well, I can tell you, our own tech team over here is very interested. And I know there's at least one other channel out there. Airlaser's got a channel she's doing.
Kato, thank you for looking, but you probably don't have the ability to drop a link in our chat. So I'm going to save you the time here and just get it straight from
It's simple, though. Craig.chat. That's it. HTTPS Craig.chat.
Somebody did a smart thing right there. So sweet. We'll get that out there. So we'll make sure we show some support to that. That actually sounds fantastic. It's interesting how little things like that make such a humongous difference in the quality and the experience of the editor, so that they can actually work on other elements of the podcast or the YouTube video or whatever. Like for me, I found an AI that would go through and find breathing and remove it, and that cut down probably 40 minutes of my editing time. By itself. So any of these little things like that, God, that is they're not small.
Yeah, I'm still primarily using Audacity, and just over time I've collected a bunch of tools that make things a little easier. But if someone's got a little bit in the way of deep pockets, there's a wonderful program called Hindenburg Journalist. It's actually a podcast. Well, it's an audio suite that professional radio producers use.
Oh, wow.
It'll set you back $100, but it's nice. It's really nice.
Is that a one-time fee or is that a recurring thing?
Yeah, it is a one-time. Yep.
All right.
They've got a pro version that's a recurring fee. Does a lot more features, but for a podcast, their journalist version is really good. But Audacity works. I mean, it's still pretty much the standard. There are all kinds of plugins that you can use. I don't use much myself. I use one called NY Compressor. They stopped supporting it a while back, but it works great. And I spoke about Levelator a little earlier, which is still out there, by the way. It does a little bit better job than Levelator, and it does it in Audacity.
Gotcha.
Yeah, when you've got a hot mic and a low mic, it'll average the two. You get a better quality.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. So when you started doing these podcasts, with the technical side of things being one major issue, how did you go about formatting your content? What was it you were doing initially? Were you seeking out a particular audience? Were you kind of gearing towards a certain group, or were you just kind of throwing it to the wall and seeing what stuck? Or
yeah, a little bit of all of that. But initially, it was, as I said, it was just for fun. This is my hobby, and I was unfortunately not blessed to live in an area where there were a lot of gamers. Used to be where I live used to be like the Mecca. Pinnacle Entertainment started here. Shane went to college here. We had Wireframe, which did the first Babylon 5 role-playing game, was out of here. We had one of the first LARPs in the area, Blacksburg by Night, that eventually became, the Masquerade LARP. I mean, we had a lot here, but just over time, people grew up, moved on, and no new people showed up.
Yeah, it seems to be a way of things.
Yeah.
So when you got started, though, you started off just kind of just doing your hobby, just throwing it to the wall and seeing what
I had a story, honestly, and frustrated writer syndrome as GMs. You've heard of that, I'm sure. So I had a novel in my head, Steampunk America, where the time was a little not precise, because I had some historical figures that didn't exist at the same time. Tesla was our big character, but Watson and Crick, the people for discovered DNA, were in there, and just kind of threw them all in. It was supposed to be very two-fisted pulp kind of game,
very League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah, very action oriented, and I wanted it specifically, and this is what I got from my pal Logan, who kind of got me started into doing it as a podcast, was episodic. Like, I wanted, as much as possible, every session to be start to finish and done, so that if people could drop in and drop out because of scheduling, right? Yeah. And so you didn't have to cancel a game because somebody didn't show up.
Oh, okay, so it's more from the player side of things.
Yeah. Heroic Cthulhu. That was the name of this guy's podcast. He's still going today, by the way. He's on YouTube now.
Now, our DM was saying that it's so hard to land on a good stop, but that's because you're writing it the same way that TV shows write, like cop shows and stuff. Like, it is intended like beginning, set, end, all in one set, in a 4-hour session or whatever it is. You're not breaking them up into smaller 1 hours. You're just going straight for like a 4-hour session at a time.
And then in the back in the day, they were 4-hour sessions. That's what we ran, 4 hours.
Just treating them all like a one shot.
Little break, another 2 hours, done. And that's how we did them. Longevity being what it is these days, they're down to 2 hours. But so that was the first thing, was episodic, so that people could come and go as they needed to.
Well, and I imagine that has a good impact on the audience too. I mean, I know personally I like shows that are more longitudinal, I guess, where they just continue with their story arc. But those one and dones, those episodics, are much easier for a new audience member to come into, land on the scene and say, what's going on? Oh, I know what's going on. I know where it's gone. I want to tune in for the next one. And it's fine. Wherever you come in, you're good to go.
But we did have story arcs, and I did model it very much after the X-Files. Like, X-Files is very much a monster of the week, per episode, but there was an overriding arc to the story. Right. There were things that bound things together. And so I tried to do that. And I tell you, it's in the first few years, we got a lot of fans just really interested in the story of what was going on. We had phenomenal players that really just made them wonderful, very memorable characters. We had villains that people, rooted to have them punched in the face, but to get away so that they'd be there for the next adventure. Right. And awesome. That was the pulp that I was looking for, and it really, I felt like it really did come out.
Yeah, and that's something that you get with, and people don't think of it this way, but when you have something that's episodic, people sometimes feel like there's not story there. But because the characters persist, you get a lot of their insight and who they are each episode. And after 22 episodes in a TV series or something, you know who these characters are now. When you roll into another season, you roll into anything else, if the characters stay, all that history travels with them. So that kind of storytelling, in my opinion, is very player character focused. It has to be.
But there is a trick to it as well, though. There was a overriding conceit of the game. How we would bring new players in is everyone belonged to an organization. The guilds in my game, again, steampunk noir kind of game, the guilds had guild investigators, and this was so that they had an impartial third party that would investigate problems that happened between the guilds so that no one was being too political about things. They'd get to the bottom of things. And so when you have organizations that persist through the storylines, when you have key NPCs that persist through the storyline, this is also something you can use to bind together a story.
Right. Now, did you find that your group size was a little smaller than average, or was it normal size? Like a full 4 to 5, or what are we looking at?
Our rule was 3 people plus GM made a game. So if we didn't have at least 3 people, there wasn't a game. Most games had 5 people. We had as many as, I want to say we had up to 7 people on a few games here and there.
Wow. Okay.
Which is very difficult.
Yeah, it's nearly impossible to run. But I was kind of wondering, because a lot of these TV shows obviously work with small cast. Like you have these, like you were saying, a tight view on what those characters are about. But typically those casts are like 2 to 3 people tops usually. Like you think of like Breaking Bad or like most of your Monster of the Week shows, or X-Files as the example there. You have your 2 plus some NPCs here and there. It's interesting to see that still works with a larger group.
Oh yeah, certainly it does. It does. Now a lot of times you'll have players that are quieter than others, don't speak up as much. You're definitely always going to have some players that are very forceful personalities, and they'll have a great deal of the screen time. And that always worried me. And I would always check with the people that were quieter just to make sure that, is there something I could do to give you more screen time? And by and large, most of them they were fine with it. They didn't feel like they were being pushed out of the limelight. It's just they envisioned a certain character that was perhaps a little quieter. But when they did speak, everyone would stop and listen because it happened so rarely. And generally, it was a gem. It was something very good came out of it.
Yeah, that's an important thing to check in on too, because sometimes you have players who are just more introverted and a little bit quieter, and for them you might be thinking like, oh my god, this person isn't getting any time, they're not getting a chance to talk. And then you talk to them later and they're like, oh no, I'm happy somebody else was talking. And then other times, of course, you have the opposite problem where somebody feels like they're getting kind of pushed out of the limelight and, just didn't want to say anything. So it is good to have that talk afterwards to make sure that it is okay, like that things are moving smoothly, and that's something that's a little more difficult to do on like a podcast or a show that's being broadcast, just because you don't really want to deal with that stuff on air, directly. But it's also kind of a lesson for the audience. So I don't know. I guess that's the advantage we have here with this show is we could talk about these issues, not in the table, let the thing flow and kind of move on. But, it's it's definitely one of those things I would stress to our audience and anybody listening later on that, it's pay attention to your players, do the little check-in afterwards, make sure everything is running smoothly and people are getting what they're looking for out of the game on that social level.
I'll tell you, that's one of the pros, though, of streaming versus podcasting is one of the things we ran across a lot was people talking over each other because there's no cue. There's no cue when someone's about to speak. So, and that was a nightmare in editing because I'd have to time shift slightly, to be able to to get everybody's words in. But when you have a live stream like this, I mean, I can see if you look like you're engaged or you're sitting there working on your cell phone while I'm trying to read the story. Maybe that's telling me I need to step up the action a bit or get that person involved. So that's a bonus in this medium.
I stream my game, but my players didn't want to use cams. Not all of them did. So I'm going camless with mine, which is fine. I'm not sure my computer can handle that many screen captures either, but nonetheless, we don't have any cams. So I still have some of those same issues, though, even though I am streaming, because I can't see my players' faces.
Yeah.
I mean, on more than one occasion, I'll ask one of them, and they're just not there. They got up to get a drink or something. I didn't know it. They didn't message me. I had no idea. So it just, we'll come back to them in a moment. Let's move on.
Yeah, that's rough. I hadn't really thought about that too much. That is interesting, though, because that is one of the things we talk about a lot, even in our game. We are live. We do have cameras. We're running it through the Discord. We're seeing each other. And even then, I still feel like there is a bigger disconnect in knowing when somebody's going to talk. There's like slight delay in the camera, or there's some body language that isn't coming through or something. And so it does get really easy to step on each other when you're doing these things. And it's fine for people listening to themselves talking, but for an audience, you really have to be conscious of that sort of stuff. And I think that's one thing that everybody who's doing this kind of hobby should be really paying attention to. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it was a real problem at the time. We tried a few various methods that ended up not working so well, like having a screen up and someone push a key right before they're about to speak so you can see, hey, someone's about to speak. It was just too distracting. That didn't last long at all. Yeah. But what I found is after I had more players that were the same players from episode to episode, they got a feel for each other. They kind of knew when someone was about to speak and when someone would speak next. And it's very interesting, actually. Yeah. Once you got that impression of that other person, even if you can't see them, you there was a flow that happened. And I loved it when that happened. We had some very stable characters for a long time with maybe one or two new ones every, few episodes, but we had a central cast of about 6 people. Alternately, at least 4 of them were able to show up but they were long time players. And those were always easier games. Oh yeah. Because of that.
Yeah, we've been a long-standing group. We've been playing together, the core of us for 20 years. But the bulk of that experience was at a table where I think we didn't have problems talking over each other because we were literally talking under each other. While Clint was talking to Levi as the DM, me and Jeff are sightseeing on the side, like not loud enough to be a problem. We were literally talking under each other all the time. So we didn't talk over each other because we were always doing other things, and Levi'd have to get our attention because he wanted to do something with us. Whereas now that we stream, or when we gone to stream, we don't recognize all those social cues because we ignored them for 15 years. And only in the last 5 we had to kind of relearn them again, on what we're doing. Yeah. So it's interesting. We're behind the curve on where we ought to be on some of that just because we've changed formats. So it's interesting to see that happen.
I kind of think that time is past when you're going to have at the table, for 10 years, same group of people, just because the world's changed. Most people, once they've graduated, they got to move on because there's no jobs in the city that they're in. There's not a lot of pull to stay in one area or another. So, I feel sorry for that. College was the best time ever for gaming for me. I mean, we would game all weekend straight with a little bit of naps here and there and get up and game some more. And that's just how it was. But when those years were over, gone,
Yeah, I'm really curious if that's to do with where you are in life, age-wise, or if it is a sign of the times. because like I think back to like high school and early college; those were our heydays, and I'm assuming those don't quite line up with other people who are going to high school saying the same thing. It just may be that life gets in the way. Like you were saying, people move and all that kind of stuff.
I tell you what, let's not even talk gaming. How often do you guys get together with your buddies to watch a game and watch TV, have a beer together anymore? I mean, for me, that's nil. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Let alone having to be able to organize schedules to have a game.
As a member of a college fraternity, we have set events. As long as our chapter was open, we have set events every year we get back for. So between my game sessions, maybe once a month I'd have with these guys, and once every 2 or 3 months a fraternity event. I was getting it more regularly. Now that my chapter's closed and we're doing this online, it just doesn't happen. I'm here in the man cave pretty much all the time.
Yeah. And for me, for my hobby to continue to exist for me personally, if I didn't make a move to online play, I wouldn't do it anymore. I wouldn't be
for us, it's same thing. Yeah, without the online format, the technology is now available. It's pretty much impossible. And I really envy anybody who still has the opportunity to play around an actual table. Going to those conventions, you see those like custom tables people are building, and their dungeons for games, and man caves and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, God, yeah, we could build that, but who would ever use it?
I will throw one caveat out to that I'm seeing a lot of now, or at least hearing a lot of now from my friends that have scattered kids. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Once you start a family, you got a built-in game group once they get old enough, and if they get interested in it, that's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
My kids are all spaced too far apart.
Well, our DM, he'll probably mention it here, but he's been writing stuff for his kids, and that does sound pretty awesome. There's a lot of parents in our group, and I have a feeling there's gonna be a lot of kids who are gonna be interested in the hobby as they kind of come into age.
Well, how can you not now? I mean, look at the popularity of Dungeons and Dragons now. I mean, it's everywhere.
It has official
kids' favorite actors play. So
yeah, it's got official spokespeople now. Like when we were growing up, it was people like what was it? Like Marilyn Manson was a person who played D&D.
Yeah.
And we all see how well they wanted us to be like him, right? Like it's not what people wanted at the time. Like there was no one else, hardly. So yeah, it's definitely different now.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the most wonderful thing about this is that, growing up, watched a lot of TV, watched a lot of cartoons, but if I could have an interactive story instead, heck yeah, I'd be all over that.
I prefer that every time.
Yeah.
Yes. So with these formats we're looking at, especially with the podcast not having visual elements, how does that affect your gameplay? Like, we talked about this a little bit before the stream, but I'm imagining there's more description.
Yes and no. This is actually something I kind of refined over many years. I started off very heavy description, but then I'm so obsessive about going back and listening to what I did during a session and trying to find out what hit and what missed.
Yeah.
And if there was more in the session when I was editing and I'm hearing more of my own voice than anyone else's while I'm editing, it's talking too much.
Okay.
So what I found is to be getting really good at giving short but detailed description. So let's say you're playing a fantasy game and you're trying to describe, a fantasy creature, right? Don't. Just tell them that it looks like something that they would know modern day, right? It's like, instead of going into the whole big description about a walking tree, it's like, it's an int, looks like an int. And it's not done that way to be lazy or to break immersion. It's there to give everything you need to know in as few words as possible.
Okay. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Paint that image quickly.
Yeah.
That's interesting because it could go a couple different ways, but I think it could go the way of kind of like those old radio shows, where, they have it all written out. It's very evocative language. It's, the music's going, you're painting the scene, you're bringing the audience along. But I think that requires, a lot of prefab. You have to have a real clear sense of where things are going to go. And everyone in there has to know their role and their lines they're supposed to be saying. And at that point, it's not a game.
Yeah.
Within
PCs, I would pick three things. Three things of description that a player could key in on. It's usually age, mannerism, and a particular color they would wear in their either their hair, their suit, whatever it was. Give them 3 things to key on, and then let them fill in the rest of the description, right? So I didn't have to.
At that point,
so I don't have to describe to an exacting detail what every NPC looks like, but I give you enough that you make your own image in your head. But there are at least 3 details for you to know when that character shows up again. You'll remember. So,
I guess and how I do it, and I don't know if I'm right or wrong on this, maybe for whatever works, but I assume the first time people enter a town, a village, or whatever, there's a fair amount of entry blurb description of the place. And then you never do that part again. Right? Like, you come back to that place in the story, you don't have to re-describe it again unless something has drastically changed, because everyone should have a good idea what Mayberry looks like at this point. Right. You don't have to re-describe Mayberry. You just got to talk about stranger who rolled into town. Who is this guy? So do you find that's what you do, like when you set your setting up initially, or do you just fantasy world, everyone automatically goes Tolkien in their head and boom, you're in?
No, I do that, but I use a few tricks that I found worked for me as a reader of, say, a novel. Is go, instead of describing what the streets look like, what the stores look like, it's like, what does the place smell like? What does it sound like? What is the overriding mood you get when you come in from the people that are around you? Are they anxious? Are they comfortable? Start with that. And that right away gives you a mood and a tone of what's going to go on here. And it's very memorable. Instead of saying you got a T intersection, cobblestone streets below you, and that's very different to saying, smells like there's a butcher to your left that's got rotting meat on the table that's just assaulting your senses. The people look like they're barely paying attention to one another, heads down, not interacting. That's more memorable than telling you how many buildings on your left, how many doors are on the one on the right.
Yeah, I've immediately got an idea of that place. Yeah, I think that is really important. It may be something any table can really use, is a more of a focus on feeling like you're describing. Like set the tone, set the feel, and then fill out the details as they're required. Because 2 scenes could be very, very, very different from one another based on how you describe them.
That actually came from the Fate system as well, as treating your environments as a character. Giving a few adjectives to describe it as if it were a character.
Interesting. And that's something that even, like, you're doing this because you're podcasting, so your audience has no visual element. But we talk a little bit about getting into how, like, Roll20 handles things, and when you see people streaming with Roll20, a lot of that sort of stuff goes away because they put a nice, pretty map picture up there.
Yeah.
And they think everything then is conveyed with that map. And some things are, but it doesn't tell you how things smell. It doesn't tell you what direction the wind's blowing. Like, it doesn't tell you any of that sort of stuff. So you still, even if you're someone who's streaming and you think you got a lot of good visual elements, or you're playing at a table with your friends and you have a battle map, like, those are still good things to take home and use, no matter which format you're doing it in, because they're going to be helpful to you no matter which way you go.
Yep. Virtual tabletops have been both a blessing and a curse to podcasting because of that, because you can throw out pictures on the screen and say, like, you see that, and then you've got to remember that your audience is wider than the table that you're playing with, and so and not describing a map that you throw out, forgetting dice rolls, that was the other thing, doing dice rolls on virtual tables, and people would you'd hear the exclamation like, "Ah!" but they don't tell what they got. Yeah. That was also something that became a problem.
I've never thought about if the two correlate, but I always wonder if Roll20 became a necessity after 3.5. Where D&D 3.5 came out, and they're like, okay, look, we have to have some way to track all this. There's no, like, when 3.5 Pathfinder, like, it just makes me wonder, like, if you were like, there's no way you can do this, theater of the mind. We need some maps and stuff. Let's make something that'll work.
Well, even then, there were virtual tabletops that existed. They were mostly used to play board games with.
Right.
Okay.
And we took them and used them for role-playing games at the time, mostly just as a dice roller to start with. It was just a dice roller. But they've been around for a very long time. I mean, there were even DOS-based virtual sort of things that were interesting. Little things that would go in the background and shoot your numbers or images up to a web page or whatever. I can't remember the one we used at the time, but it was a granddaddy. It still exists today. Again, it's mostly used to play board games with. I cannot remember the name of it, but yeah, we used them then, but we used them very limited. We did not use them for big scale maps, mostly used them for dice rolling and to just shoot an image out now and then.
The virtual version of me using Hero Quest to run some early games.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, look, it came with all the furniture and models I need. I just need some
Exactly.
people to play.
Yeah. Well, you come in a fine tradition, you getting that box set of, what was it, Outdoor Adventure that you needed to play the original Dungeons and Dragons with. You needed that map from that board game.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you're right, though. There are some elements around the table that need to be in play for the audience as well. And the dice rolls is a big part of that. It's a lot of the drama that, goes into tabletop, is what are the dice going to do, in that critical moment when you need them, so like, I think, anytime you kind of capture that in some format, like you're saying with the podcast, you definitely have to announce what's happened. Maybe like almost like a sports announcer, he's got to get a 14 and here he comes in with, oh my God, it's a 15, and just like really dial it up there and make it go crazy. I'm probably like the worst sports announcer of all time, but that kind of concept I think really plays well. I don't know if that's the way it is for our audience here necessarily, but I know when I'm watching something that's exciting to me, like the tension riding on those rolls and then actually seeing it, not hearing it announced necessarily, but actually seeing it.
Yeah, I think for me, like, it made such a difference for me just even on Roll20 when we turned on the stupid little graphic dice that just rolls across the screen and stops on one. Like, it already has the number on the bottom. I know what it's going to land on, but I don't care. I haven't seen it. I'm watching that stupid little die bounce around my screen until it stops.
You see it roll, and it lands on the number. Like, oh, it was so close to that 20.
I will say though that with the virtual tabletops made some games possible to play. You couldn't do it without some kind of virtual tabletop with certain games. We were playing early versions of Cortex, which required you to group your dice. So like you rolled so many dice, you would keep so many, you'd put so many aside. And unless you had a visual way of doing that, you could not play it just in audio. It just, because the GM had to see what the groupings were, the players had to see what the groupings were.
That's an interesting concept. Yeah.
Kind of like splitting dice pools in World of Darkness.
Yeah.
Similar, I guess.
I hadn't really thought about that being a main thing. We haven't really dipped into a ton of different game systems like that, I guess. So we tend to stay in one lane, maybe two lanes, here and there. But there's a lot of systems in play now that have these like very unique dice rolling mechanics, and like I really hadn't considered how much of an impact that would have on how you presented it.
So the game that got me started, Heroic Cthulhu, Logan it was a hack together system that was part Call of Cthulhu, used some things from Masterbook, if you remember Masterbook, but Masterbook used a set of cards. And whenever you would do something in a game, you had to flip a card, and the card would give you a certain bonus or something that would happen that would change the situation. So Logan had this massive stack of cards that he made by hand, and when you played at his table, you had those cards there. Playing online, that was an issue. So we found this board game virtual tabletop, and we hand put in all these cards. I did the programming so that you could flip the card, and so people could take cards and trade cards, because it was a sub game within the game, because you could trade your cards. And we used that tabletop for that, and it was wonderful.
It's like Deadlands. They had, it's a Wild West kind of theme, and so they had cards that came up. So you, instead of rolling dice, you draw cards out of the deck, and that was your thing. You can gamble and all kinds of stuff. Like, just those different mechanics are also just like an interesting flavor. They just add different something to it. Or like the fate dice, or heroic points, or whatever. Like, there's really not much to them, but for some reason, there's a lot packed in there. You know,
chucking that they're bringing up those FFG dice. I'm telling you,
yeah.
It's just reading those is like another language. It's
True enough. But the march of technology has made a lot of things easier or even possible that we weren't able to before.
Well, and systems can become much more complex, but not be complex for the player.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, so the under the hood stuff can really be interesting, but you don't have to interact with it at all. So that's a beauty. Get those crazy high dice pools, and Dungeons and Dragons throwing their fireball, and you're like, well, I got to count all of this. Like crap. Oh, it's done automatically. Perfect. Okay, keep the table moving.
I will say that the detriment, though, to having these virtual tabletops, though, is there's a lot of fiddly stuff that people tend to get distracted with as well, and I think that takes away from the story sometimes.
Oh, 100%.
Worrying too much about getting the battle map just so, and where your miniatures on the map, and I very much like to do theater of the mind combat. Even if I do have a battle map, I prefer that. And I think that kind of takes away.
Well, it makes a lot of sense for what you're doing. Theater of the mind's got to be there for what you're doing, I imagine. Because how do you do a scene on a battle map in a podcast format? Like, how does that translate?
One of the rule systems within Fate, remember that's how we started with this, was the original version of the Fate rules. They had, instead of distances, you had zones, right? A near zone, a far zone, etc. And so that's how you would describe things, is like, these are your zones. We're going to call the stairwell over there is going to be in the far zone. You can interact with anything in the near zone and just do it that way. A lot of it was description. Like if someone told me that they were situating themselves back to back with their buddy, it's like, okay, well, your buddy's over there, so you're over there too. So, this other thing is going to have reach on you. And it's just, when I'm running that, I usually am scribbling this out on
Oh, you have to. Like, I don't know how you keep track of it. Like that was always the problem for me, is that I'm not a very visual person in terms of like my internal space. And I have a really hard time tracking all that. Like for me, like if I can hear the scene, I can imagine what's happening, but after a certain number of details, I'm completely confused. I have no clue what's going on, even if I'm really engaged with it. So like for me, like the map's really critical for me to understand the scene. But I know there's a lot of players that are not like that at all, and for them, it detracts from it, when they see the scene. So it's interesting how, different people interact with information.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I don't require it, but I do find when there is one, but I don't require it. I've played 3 or 4 different games now under Bert, and I've never had any problems figuring out what I was doing or where things were. So
yeah, it's I vastly prefer story-oriented games that combat happens because you did something wrong.
Sure, yeah.
So I've never been a big like 3.5 player or 4th edition player, which in my mind those games are purely tactical games. Sure, there's role playing, but people mostly paid them for the tactics. Never was that kind of gamer.
Yeah.
Not to say I haven't enjoyed games like that. It's just that's not my style.
Yeah. Yeah, and then obviously different games are going to require or utilize things in a different way. And obviously 4th edition, like you're saying, is more tactical. So it obviously required more of a map to kind of go through. Now, it looks like some of the chat is also kind of talking back and forth in similar fashion here, that some people are saying they have an easier time and a harder time with, visual, theater of the mind versus not. And it's, I imagine if we did kind of an even poll, of like what people interpreted scenes as, like how they took in information, which ones, made more sense to them in their mind. I bet it would be pretty evenly split.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's just how your particular brain works. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong at all.
You can ask 10 people in a room after an event happened in front of them, and you'll get 5 different stories. Like people perceive and their brain works differently, so that you get 4 or 5 different results, and that was all of them standing in a room watching something happen. Even especially to kind of catch them by surprise. All right, how's it going? That's amazing. He never lost the closed captioning.
Beautiful.
Nice.
Well, we are testing new technology tonight, so while yes, things are looking a lot smoother, hopefully it sounds pretty good. Every once in a while, there's going to be a nuclear bomb explosion, and we'll be okay. Thankfully, it refired up pretty quickly. So that'll be fun.
We were a little tired of the Discord flickering screens, so we wanted to try something that wasn't going to flicker so much. So
it's all to amuse you.
Mm-hmm. So, kind of switching gears slightly here. Since you've been in the podcast game, obviously there are different ways of distribution. That kind of go into that. Now we've kind of recently kind of got into this a little bit with our stuff. I've been kind of looking in through Buzzsprout and using that to kind of like distribute the show across to podcasts, like Spotify and iTunes and iHeartRadio and the whole thing. Have you found more success in one place versus another? Or
what I'm looking down here is I actually, in anticipation of questions like this, I printed out some statistics. I changed my hosting provider a little bit over a year and a half ago to Simplecast.
That's what
mostly because they give you really good statistics and breakdown. Mm-hmm. And some of it's worthless. It doesn't really tell you much, and I understand this is probably true for streaming as well. Subscriber count is awesome, but it doesn't really tell you how many people are really looking or listening to your media. Because you don't know if that person is just having it on auto download or just hit a button that they like you and then they never go back and see it. Mm-hmm. But with Simplecast, I get hard statistics on how many times that file has been downloaded by individual IP addresses.
Yep.
And so I found this really amusing when I first looked at these breakdowns. 43% of the people that listen to my podcast listen to it through Podbean. I have never put my podcast on Podbean. I have never did any kind of connection with podcast to relate it with my podcast ever. That's so crazy. What I found out is that anyone can stick your podcast in a feed. So Podbean, Pocket Cast, any of these different casts, anyone can put in your podcast. And apparently at some time long ago, one of my listeners put the podcast in Podbeans.
Wow. And that was successful. You owe that person like a beer or something. I mean, 43%, that's pretty good.
So once I found out that was happening, I went on to Podbeans and I claimed the stream so that I would be able to see the metrics on their site from it, which they allow you to do. 25% is still on Apple Podcasts, which I used to believe was where most people were listening to me from. Wasn't the case.
Isn't that interesting?
And this is how having a good provider that gives you metrics can really, if you're trying to monetize what you're doing, incredibly helpful. Let's see, 5% of my listeners do it direct download. They just grab the file. In my metadata for my podcast, I always have a link for direct download. A lot of people just choose to directly download it that way.
Okay.
I can tell which browsers people are using. Chrome seems to be the number one browser that people are using to interface with my site. So again, if you're using this as a monetization platform, that gives you a lot of ideas where you can better market or spend your time marketing. Mm-hmm. Maybe you do want to throw Podbean a few bucks to get into one of their tiers where they give you better metricing or where they put your podcast higher in their feed listings.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering how this was happening because we're actually showing up on Radio Addict.
And you never put it there, yeah.
I have no clue what that is. So that's interesting. The other thing I thought was really fun was kind of looking at the heat map of like where people are watching your content from. It's once you start to look at that global picture and you start to see, like people from South America and like, Germany, and you're like, what?
Yeah, you got to learn how to say hello in Germany. So next time you come on.
And it tells you interesting spikes, like 76%, not surprisingly, of my listeners from the United States. Mm-hmm. Behind that, Canada is the next highest. And I've got people in Japan, Switzerland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Serbia, all over the place. But there was a couple of months for unknown reason where I was getting an enormous amount of downloads from Japan. It just this huge spike, 1,500 downloads over the course of like a month and a half from Japan. Wow. It's like, who the heck is doing that?
That was a big hit, apparently.
Yeah.
Somebody on a business trip?
Could be.
You never know.
Yeah. We were always, once I was able to get the metrics on this, I wish I was able to do it in the early days, because in the original campaign, France was the villain. I always used the French as our main villain. So I always wondered how that played. They were phenomenal villains, by the way. They were great villains.
You didn't realize that you've been banned in France. Your podcast is not allowed to be aired in France.
Views. One. One and done. It is interesting when you start looking at these numbers, because it kind of gives you a sense of the community, like who's out there, like interacting with your style of content, not necessarily your personal content, but, like seeing that, at least on the YouTube side of things, when I was doing some of these games, Germany made like a very large chunk of my audience. And I don't know if there's something particular about the types of content I was putting out, or if it's just Germany is into these sorts of things, period.
I talked to a friend of mine that was in Japan as an English teacher, and he was a fan of the podcast, played a few times, but he told me that a lot of the native populace, you listen to podcasts and gaming podcasts in particular to learn English. And it's like, oh man.
Wrong. I don't know if that's where I would start if I was going to have someone learn English. Like, there's a lot of words in there that I don't think you use anywhere else.
Exactly.
They're not common words that you want to learn first.
But it's entertaining and it's conversation, so it's all the weird little things you're going to say, like the odd partial sentences and idioms and all kinds of nonsense that go into it, which of course English is like predominantly idioms at this point.
It couldn't be any worse than learning a foreign language from watching a television show. Yeah, it couldn't be any worse than that, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess. Not sure I would want to do that either. But after 5 years of trying to learn Spanish just in school, I guess it couldn't hurt me any, because I still don't speak Spanish very well. So
right there with you. Now, do you find yourself, taking any efforts to make your content more accessible?
In what meaning of that?
I was leaving it open-ended to kind of catch anything you may be doing, but for tonight, for instance, we're using closed captioning, or attempting to. It's one of the things we're trying to do a little bit differently, make it a little bit more accessible. But
other than from just the very beginning, trying to really hit on using descriptions more than just visuals, using other senses as well. Honestly, I'm sure there are things that I've picked up over time, because I have had players that I've got to meet in real life that were otherly abled in different ways. I'm sure that's influenced my style here and there. I've had some listeners again state that they enjoy that it's more than just when I describe something, it's more than just what a person sees.
Because that's one, maybe if you want to call it a con of podcasting, is when they download the file, they're only getting audio. Yeah. There's no visual elements. So when you see streams that want to try to be more inclusive, they might put closed captioning on. They might put their adjectives on there, he, him, things like that. They go that so that when people are scanning through different D&D sites or tabletop RPG sites that they want to watch, they see those pronouns on there. They immediately know this is a channel that's friendly to that environment and is going that route. I want to go there and check out what they're doing. And they may not like it 5 minutes once they're in there and bail out, but that immediate recognition of it gets their foot in the door. You can't do that with a podcast, because you don't have that ability, really.
And there are a lot of times where when I'm describing an NPC, I don't actually tell them sex. I let them figure it out, or just decide what it is based on their interactions. I do that quite often. I don't know. That's a hard one. I mean, I know this is like a trigger topic to a lot of role playing now. I don't know. I don't know what to say to that. I've got a style that I adapt over time to the players that I have. Generally, unless it's the player characters that are engaging in, if you have one player character that is romancing another player character, that's about the only time you're going to know anything about behind the sheets and behind the curtains of any NPC or otherwise. I leave that up to the character or the players to decide what a relationship might be. I don't typically I don't overtly say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's just interesting, because because of the structure of it, that does really make it a little bit more of a challenge. And just getting your media across to as many people as possible is probably a challenge in and of itself. Like I was kind of looking at it for ours, and we're just putting up the podcast with our channel logo and just calling it a day. But you could go all out and make thumbnails for each individual podcast episode, which God help whoever's doing that, because that's an epic amount of work.
When you make enough, you can hire an artist.
Exactly. But you could really get a lot across, I guess, in that image if you were so inclined. But beyond that, I don't know really what else you could do, like in terms of increasing accessibility in the podcast.
It's a rough one. It really is.
Other than to go out of your way to have characters that represent certain things in the game on a character level. That'd be the only other thing I could think of to do, is just to make sure that those things are included in the descriptions or in the characters themselves. From I don't know if you do seasons to season necessarily, or if you switch from one game to another game system or whatever you have, but not so much tackle the topic itself, but just have those variations and different people, genders, whatever represented is the only other thing I think you could really do, in my opinion.
Well, one of the things, just from the beginning, being open to having listeners come in and play, our players are from everywhere. We've had, currently we've got players in New Zealand, we've had Australia, all over the European Union, Japan, Germany, just everywhere.
That's awesome.
We've had a number of women play. We've got one that's been still playing with us when she's able to, that was there from nearly the very beginning.
Fantastic.
So
now, where are you meeting everybody? Obviously it sounds like you're having audience members maybe speaking up and saying hey, I want to come sit in your table.
Yeah, and more recently here, I got an old school Dungeons and Dragons game going, just because I wanted to scratch that itch, play some BX once again, just by posting on a board that was for that game, saying, "Hey, I want to run this. Who would like to play?" And 5 new players right there.
Wow! And of course, you got a Discord.
Yeah,
where you can drag all these people too, and then you've got a community you're building up under it, and you can now you got to pull people to pull from. So
they're playing my other games too now for some of them, and
we haven't talked much about it, but where I met you is through the Notorious DMG, which is a Dungeon Masters group, where all of us who do a lot of DMing, GMing, I'm fortunate I get to be a player more often than some of you do in DMG, because I've been run under Levi for a long time. But outside of Levi, I run games at the game shop, I run games here online, and I get to play when Levi runs. That's about it. Mm-hmm. So it was cool. I got in here, I get to meet you, and over the last year, I've gotten to play more games than I care to mention. After meeting you, Matt, Chuck, I got people offering me spots in games all the time. It's been fantastic. I'm taking every bit of advantage of it as I can. So obviously, then this gives you an avenue then to meet a whole bunch of more people. Yeah.
The more that technology evolves, that we can communicate with each other in different ways, in many different platforms, it just increases that reach of finding your tribe, just finding the people that enjoy the things that you do. And, it can still be largely anonymous. I don't require anyone to have a video cam if they want to play in my game. I just require them to have a microphone that just is serviceable.
Yeah. Low bar of entry.
Yeah, a very low bar.
Yeah.
Now, are you big on the convention scene at all? I know that used to be kind of networked,
Yeah, I used to do tables for various companies. I'd go and run games for various companies, and you just go and have fun. But the older you get, the harder those were. Harder those got to be. Yeah. Dragon Con 2005 may have been the last big one I went to. A few small ones since then.
I would say Dragon Con's a huge one.
That's a party con, man. My liver couldn't take that anymore if I wanted to.
Saves all this money for the Kickstarters, don't you?
Yeah. Oh, man. Kickstarter is... You're talking about more blessings and curses. I think we're living in an era now where there's more games, there's more ideas that see the light of day than there ever were before. There's so many phenomenal, good, ideas and authors out there, and even some that are not great, but
just keep things moving.
Yeah, and they could be polished into something better. And having that platform to be able to do that, I have this idea, I want to get it out there, but I could never afford to do a print run. All right, Kickstarter, do a PDF only, you're golden.
Now, okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's been amazing the number of games that have come from Kickstarter because, as an MMO player for the last 17 years, I've also played tabletop with my friends, like I said, a once a month game. Most of the Kickstarters I've looked into have been video games. It's a much higher cost. There are a lot more people have to get involved in it. And it was kind of used as activism in a way to try to get the video games to be made not by people like EA because of how people felt about EA, the corporate, this, that, the other. But we're 7 years after some of those Kickstarters and those games still aren't out. We've been talking about this on Smart Gamer Live for the last couple of weeks because of some hoopla that's going on with one of those games right now. But in the meantime, while Kickstarter doesn't seem like the right format for them, I'm thinking, boy, what it has done for TTRPGs, though. Anyone with a good idea, you can raise enough money with a good idea in short amount of time to get a product out there. Because
we're in
less required
too. The era we're in now with the ability to distribute, at the fingertips of an individual. That was never the case back in the 80s and the 90s.
There were games that most people would never knew that existed back in the early 80s and 90s because the print runs were so small or they were only sold at conventions that were awesome games that now that they have things like Kickstarter and there's others can see the light of day again. They can come back after a very long hiatus. And I really love that too. There's some risk, but I've backed 448 role-playing games so far on Kickstarter. Out of those, there are 3 that I know I will never receive anything from, and maybe 5 more that I will eventually get something from. That's not bad. That's not a bad ratio.
Yeah, not bad at all.
No. Yeah. That's much better than we're seeing out of the video game genre. Yeah. Way better than what we're seeing out of that. So,
and
crazy.
Worst come to worst, though. You've kind of facilitated other people in the industry. If you're able to do it, obviously you don't want to just throw money into a black hole, but at some point there is some content creation, there's some new ideas being churned around, like we were just saying, and that plays off of other groups, as they're releasing any details at all. It influences other people in the community and helps them come up with newer ideas for their game systems. Hopefully not just straight stealing, but you get some interesting crossover in between them.
And for people that get really mad when their Kickstarters are late or when they don't get them at all, you shouldn't be pledging to a Kickstarter if you can't afford to lose the money, because what you're doing is you're funding someone's dream. I mean, a lot of people use it for a pre-order system, but that's not what it was ever intended for.
No, it's like venture capitalism, basically. But
I wouldn't even say that. I mean, basically, someone's coming to you with a hat out saying, I want this to exist. Would you like this to exist? Let's try and make this exist.
I think where you have to turn the corner is you can't think of yourself as an investor. You have to think of yourself as a donor.
Yep.
And once you're a donor, there is almost no real liability back the other direction towards you. Yep. There's very little. You get what you get at the end of the day. And
the only thing that burns me, this just absolutely tears me up, is when they go silent and they stop talking to the people that donated money. Because if it failed, it failed. Fess up to it and say you tried, you did everything you could. And I've backed several that did that. A lot of them offered to give back what they could in donor money. It's like, no, man. Hey, you tried. You made an honest effort. You won't, you won't hear anything from me. But the ones that just go off and they're gone, and you don't see them ever again. A year later, nothing. Those guys burn me.
You roll back up. You roll back up to the store, and the windows are boarded up, and the shutters are pulled, and there's clearly the lights are off.
Anyone out there doing a Kickstarter, no matter how bad it goes, don't stop talking to the people that support your vision, man. Don't ever stop talking to them.
You only get to make that mistake one time. It doesn't matter how good your next idea is. There will be no one there.
Oh, the big one was since Cyberpunk Red coming out soon, and the Cyberpunk video game, which is everyone's waiting for.
Oh yeah.
He had a failed Kickstarter, Mechton Zero or Mechton Zeta, which is a new version of that. He could not deliver. He could not deliver it, mostly because I assume his time was being taken up by Cyberpunk. Right. He did the right thing, man. Mike Pondsmith. He's like, look. It's not going to happen, and at least not now. Here's your money back. I'm sure he was able to do that because of his lucrative investments in the Cyberpunk video game, but he didn't have to. There's plenty of Kickstarter creators that just went silent and never gave a dime back.
Yeah.
So, kudos to him.
We have Jay Gray from them coming on here in a couple weeks. Mark, so we get to talk a little about Cyberpunk then. I'm excited.
Yeah. But if anything, that just increases your fandom by doing things like that. So, something bad happened. It went south, but you didn't stop talking and you made good.
And there's always people that were upset about it either way. I mean, there's always going to be people who are upset. But there's a lot more people who are understanding when it is a situation like that. And what we've seen a lot with other video games like that is that people are pretty much want it to be right. They don't want it to come out early and be wrong. They want it to be right. There's a certain level of how many times can you delay before people are no longer willing to accept the delay.
So, Dustin, are you big on kickstarting video games? You've done a few of them?
I've done exactly one.
Okay.
Exactly one. And I have vowed again, I am never doing one until I have a release date. I'm done with them.
I've backed a few 8-bit. I'm really big into 8-bit.
Oh, man.
My first computer that I did extensive programming on was a Commodore 64. Did some on Ataris, did some assembly, and it's back in vogue for those of us
assembly.
that are that geeky.
That's awesome.
Making games for old systems. So I've backed some of those.
Man, that is a tough skill set. You're looking back, like I was just watching a video about the making of Myst, and obviously that's not in those days, but we're talking about like SE30 days for the Mac, so there's still not a lot computer power there. CD-ROM was just coming out, and they're looking at it like, how do we do anything with this without the seek times really just crushing us?
That's my background, computer science, electrical engineering. And one of the things that I think people around my age yet again are missing about those early computers is you could know everything about them, hardware, every single chip, and you could make them dance because you know all the tricks to get every bit of the power you can out of them. Nowadays, nobody can know exactly how every chip in a modern computer works. There's just too much. Like, you tell me exactly how the timing on this this PLA chip works here. Go ahead and tell me that. You don't know, but on the simpler machines, you could.
So with all the Kickstarters you have back for tabletop RPGs, there's got to be a few of them that haven't come out yet. So let's go down a little list here. Maybe some this year. Is there some anticipated ones for this year that you're getting excited about?
Oh, man. Dark Master. I was a huge Rolemaster fan. That was my game in college. We had a 7-year Rolemaster game. Loved it to death. So Dark Master, I'm so looking forward to that.
I'm going to pause you a second. I know most of our viewers have probably never heard the word mentioned before. So tell us a little bit about Dark Master / Rolemaster.
All right. So as I said, my background's in engineering, right? So if you're an engineer and you like using calculators and slide rules, Rolemaster's the game for you. There's a chart for everything.
A million of them. Yep.
You're doing a forced march with a company. There's charts that tell you exactly how many times you've got to stop and defecate. It's
that's
but
great.
Regardless of that, once you grokked its internal consistencies, and it was very consistent, it was a great game.
Yeah, man, that's really fascinating to hear that's what your bread and butter is. But now you're into these theater of the mind, story-driven things.
He's got range. Yeah. You can't back 440 some. Hundreds and not range.
It's just really interesting to see, like how people are composed, in terms of their gamer DNA.
Well, no matter how complex a game is, man, you can still dredge story out of anything.
Right.
That's never a problem.
It's just how often do you want to break down into charts and, what level of when do you want to get into the nuance and when do you want to just hand wave it?
It's time in life. It's time in life. So that was college, man. So keeping track of notebooks and reams of information for my character is no big deal. Today, no way. If I can't fit it on a 3.5-inch index card, forget it.
you had 2 or 3 1-hour elective lectures a day to sit down and figure that stuff out, didn't you? In college, sitting through some World War II history class, like sure, whatever. Everyone knows World War II, and you're over there writing game notes.
Oh, talking about the futurism of all this stuff, I am looking forward to the day, and if there are any investors out there, listen closely. Soon there is going to be a call for retirement homes for gamers. Damn it, there's gonna be. Where we can once again relive those Rollmaster experiences when we're gaming 20 hours straight and logging.
We're gonna be the weirdest
detail.
set of nursing home patients you have ever seen your whole life. It's gonna be like the one room with just a bunch of computer terminals and all the old people sitting around at them. Like they don't even have
Iron
individual
Maiden
rooms
Metallica at 11 because we can't hear it, so you might as well put it on 11.
Have Jeff up there at the nurse's station banging on it. Tell Tim to get off the Warcraft. He's been on there for 5 hours.
That's going to be a moneymaker. I'm telling you. I'd retire right now if I could check myself into a home like that.
I was going to say, our tech guy here, Clint, he actually works in that business, elder care. So, maybe this is something possible. Who knows?
Yeah.
That is funny, though.
Yeah. Jay Bruce
slap on those extra thick Depends and let's settle in for a long session.
You've already hinted on it, but obviously Cyberpunk. There's a lot of buzz about Cyberpunk Red this year.
Mm-hmm.
So what else you have on your list of potential games for this year, Bert?
Wow. I'm also really big into OSR games as well. And that is a burgeoning community right now with a lot of really fantastic stuff going on with that. Mm-hmm. What am I really looking forward to? That's a hard thing to pin down because I just love the genre. I'll buy a book to just read through it. I may never play it, but I'll get ideas from it. I'm looking forward to anything that anyone's wanting to put out. I mean, really, that's my thing. I'm just so in love with the genre, what it does. My wife is her background in psychology, and she has really an emphasis on working with children on spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And I myself, if I were to get a diagnosis this day and age, would probably be considered Aspergian. I am certain of it. My wife tells me daily that this is the truth. But video games and role-playing games, if there is a better way to teach someone on spectrum to socialize and to be able to work out consequences, I don't know what it would be. It's a wonderful tool for that.
Yeah, I would say it's a great tool just for anyone, period. I mean, we talk about this a lot on the show, just the amount of life skills that you can develop, just through sitting around a table or an online presence and actually putting together a game. That's the whole act of collaborative storytelling just requires it, build those all that.
Throw a Rollmaster in there and you can learn some algebra, some geometry, some
Oh yeah, there's a reason why like Critical Role was fundraising for schools. There's a lot of crossover. Like we've talked about this in past episodes, but I mean when I think about what I was interested in reading when I was young, it was all fantasy stuff, it was all sci-fi stuff. Like it was game related things that got me interested in other fields. Like I got interested in science because of the stuff I was reading, from fantasy setting or whatever, and it's the same thing with history. I got interested in history because of that, or philosophy, or all these other things as a result directly from gaming.
If we didn't have Star Trek, we wouldn't have a space program.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah. Like that's out there. It is interesting how, and that in particular, like sci-fi, we always imagine things being a certain way, like ray guns and like pointy ships with, metal on the top and it looks tin cans and whatnot. And then scientists get inspired and then they go, okay, well, let's make some of that shit, like which way does it go? Is it chicken or the egg kind of thing?
Like, to me, that's why story is so important and so powerful, because until someone dreams it, it can't exist, Story is so useful to learn how to exist in a society, to learn consequences from actions. And it's a safe space. You sit down and you play a game with people. There are rules, right? There are rules to how you interact at this table. So children or adults that have issues with the randomness of talking with people in real life, right? It's slightly safer because there are rules to how you converse, to how you talk. It's just such a powerful tool for so much.
Mm-hmm. Yep, indeed. Do you find that you sit down at the beginning of your groups and stuff and do like session zeros where you go over what some of them rules might be?
Oh, heck yeah.
Do you do all that for your groups?
We do session zeros where not just rules, but we actually build the campaign itself. It's like, okay, I have 3 elements I want in. Everybody give me an element you want in this game. Okay, we've got the very basics. We're going to zero in on the town. Okay, hey, you give me a place that exists in this town. Okay, give me a major character that exists in this town, and just get some buy-in from everyone, so that everyone has a little bit of their own DNA in the game that we're playing.
Yeah.
And that's like, that's rule 1 now with starting new games, is getting that buy-in.
Yeah, I love that. The more I see of that, the more I'm inspired by that.
Does that help you replace the character background, or do you get that then in addition?
Oh man, this is an argument I have going on in a few of the social chat groups I'm in now. Is people coming to the table with reams of background for the character, and my idea is, no, I want you to come with a character that's a blank slate. I don't want you to know anything about the character. When you sit down and you start playing, you're gonna understand this character as we go along. You're gonna discover this character. So when you go into a town, I'll say, someone says, we want to do this. I'll say, okay, so who here would know the chief constable in this town? All right, how do you know him? Well, what's your relationship to him? Okay, now there's some background. You roll a crit when you're trying to do something. It's like, great, you rolled a crit while you're trying to swim upstream and rescue this child. Why do you swim so good? What in your background made you good at that? Okay, from now on, you get a bonus at that.
Now, do you think that's an older school method of doing it versus a newer school, perhaps?
I personally think so, because it was always about, and when you had fewer rules, it was all about rulings, right? Not the rules, because they, for the most part, didn't exist. It was what you came up with the table, and that's why every first level character wasn't a cookie cutter of each other, because there was so very little to flesh out your character. You had to do it in other ways, right? How you acted at the table, what you did with your character, So that's my thing, is I really prefer people not to know anything about their character when they come to the table. I want you to figure it out with me.
Now, what's interesting is on Zweihander RPG, because they changed the name of their stream station again to Zweihander RPG now. It's not Grim Perilous Gaming, it's Zweihander RPG. I'm in a Zweihander game, Enemy Within, and that module was written like 20 years ago for Warhammer Fantasy. Well, one of the first things that happens is you run into this like mutated guy, like after a couple bar hops, and he's immediately designated as like an old best friend of one of the PCs. Yep. Now, no one wrote that crap in their background. We're all walking in with the characters, and all of a sudden we find out it's Kellen's like best friend, war buddy. We're like, Kellen, who is this guy? He's kind of looking at us like, I don't know. I guess he's my old best friend. Like, so it's weird, because like you could tell like that those older modules were written in that sort of format. Like, we're going to inject some of this background into these characters that probably don't have any.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's and that happens 2 or 3 times in the beginning of that module with different characters to kind of their own individual hooks into what's going on.
So Dustin, I'm going to respond to somebody in the thread here. Says, if you don't have backstory, how does your party jive together? Well, just like you said, in this particular adventure, they gave you a reason. Like, that's the hook. Coming up with a hook that would allow this disparate group of people to do something together. The hook is what brings you together, and then you figure out why you're together as you play.
I think people get sometimes too stuck in the weeds. I think I see that a fair amount, where people get too stuck in the weeds, like, well, my character's a vegan and this or whatever. Like people are really good at coming up with good background reasons why they won't do something, and not nearly enough time spent as to why they will do something.
Yeah. I mean,
I think that's what I see a lot of. So I think most character groups will normally jive without too much problem once a bigger thread is typically out there.
Yeah, that's it. The hook. I mean, every game should have a hook that gets everybody involved right from the get-go, no matter what the background is.
Yeah.
And to say I want people to show up at my table without knowing their past, it doesn't mean I want you to show up without knowing what your personality is.
Exactly.
Yeah, have a personality. If you're going to be a rude, boorish sort, go for it. We'll figure out why that is later on.
Yeah. Well, I kind of wonder if maybe a hybrid approach might be even more impressive, because like you have some things fleshed out, you have some direction of where you want to go with the character, you have some concepts of things you can latch onto, And then whenever you get in these scenes where you're having events occur, like, you're coming across, DM says it's your long lost brother, or you get the, swimming suddenly heroically, why is that? You can hook it into what you already have. Because I think for myself, even though I did play those old school games, I would find myself put off by having to, on the spot, define my character, or coming into a scene and saying, like, I don't know what my character would do, but I'm just throwing dice, until something gels,
I think my personal style is I like about one page.
Yeah.
About one page.
For sure.
One short page, who I was, maybe a few places about where I came from, where I'm kind of heading, give it to the DM, let him fill in all the loopholes, everything else. But that's easy to do when you have a DM that's homebrewing 100% of your game. If you're not running in a 100% homebrew game, your 15-page backstory doesn't mean anything if you go into Curse of Strahd. It means zero, zilch, nada. Again, when we speak from experience, we're talking 20 years of just pure homebrew, like under Levi, who's going to use every bit of that info we give him. So I think we have to keep that as a caveat. Whereas, it's a little different.
And the GM's ability to improv is important too. Also from the chat here, it says we had a hook and then we grew away from it and it was a hot mess. Well, then that will definitely show how well vetted your GM is into the improv scene. I've had many a game where the players didn't take my hook at all. Absolutely refused the hook. That's okay. That game became 100% improv at that point, and they were no worse than any other game.
Well, for those of you who haven't watched the hook I used in Terror and Treefell, I literally caught them buying equipment for their characters. The first thing everyone does is they take their gold and they go buy equipment for their characters. So they all went to buy, and while they were trying to find what they wanted for their characters, I literally just had something happen to them right in the middle of it. So they didn't even get to spend their starting gold before I whisked them off and sent them on to where they were headed. So it was... one of the players told me it was one of the best hooks they'd ever seen.
Nice.
Just because they were not expecting to get caught in the middle of actually making their character to be hooked in the middle of character creation. So...
No, and improv doesn't have to be 100% off the cuff either. I mean, when I've got extra cycles in the brain, when I'm working during the day, I'll think of like a scene that would be cool and I'll write it down, After a while, I got a notebook full of scenes that I can just shove in wherever.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the hook is definitely the big thing. At the beginning of the game, if you can have some event that disrupts enough of what is normal, that they have to get out of the house, like, there is something they want to be doing and something has just fucked it up. That's going to bring people together quickly. If you're with a group of players that are willing to buy into a story at all, you should be able to manage it at that point. But I do think there is some of that, if you're a new gaming group kind of coming together, you're still feeling out the concept of gaming. You're still feeling out the concept of playing a character. Maybe you haven't spent a lot of times playing cooperative games with those particular people, etc. It's going to take a little bit more work, because that trust isn't necessarily there already. And the concept of push and pull isn't quite developed yet. So that is a hard environment for any DM, I think, to kind of cut their teeth. But that's how we all start,
it's the whole yes, but.
Right.
Allow, but put in a condition,
Right.
Sure. It's when I was running the long form campaigns, the Steam Seal and Murder campaigns, when my players didn't take the hook, it was great. Okay. So we're going to go on this tangent instead. That doesn't mean what I had plotted to happen didn't still happen. It absolutely still happened. So they may come back next week and somebody very important was the next murdered victim because they didn't act last session.
Exactly. That's a lot about how I do it too. Like you take certain actions, but what I'll be doing between game sessions is figuring out how to slowly direct that path back towards kind of where things were headed to begin with. But taking on new elements and adding it in.
Yeah, but if it doesn't go back there, I'm fine with it. I mean, it really is. I like to have the players dictate the plot, right?
Sure.
I've got ideas of what's going to go on in my world, and where they interface with it, they get to make changes to it. Where they don't interface with it, other things happen.
Right.
But so it's a give and take there.
I think it's critical to be able to look at your story, and if the players aren't biting on it, if it's not something that they're interested in, they're not going to go into it. I think it's critical as a storyteller or DM to say, okay, you know what? I'll come up with something different. What are they doing? Can I do anything with what I'm doing in this? Yes. Okay, I'll do that. Can I not? Okay, well, I guess I have to throw it out. Let's try something different, to hook these players. And I think a lot of people are afraid of that, because I think everyone is, biased towards their own story, right? They write a thing, they're like, oh, this is going to be great. And then the players don't like it. And you're like, shucks, but, you got to play, with the table that you got. And people are going to have different interests. There's things that, I'm going to enjoy that I think other people are going to like, and they're going to absolutely hate it, and you don't want to keep feeding people bars of soap.
Well, and the good thing with a group, if you got 4, 5, 6 players, they're going to find things in the game that they did like. Mm-hmm. So instead of worrying about how to get them to eat the bar of soap, you start looking at the things they did gravitate towards. Mm-hmm. Like, my group in Treefell didn't initially gravitate towards some of the other plot elements that I thought they might initially, but they gravitated very quickly to a random NPC I didn't think was going to be any big deal. He's now a minor boss when I'm writing the module. Yeah. Because, he got elevated to that status because they honed in immediately, like, that preacher guy ain't no good. Oh, yeah, really? That guy? All right. You think he's behind all this? Okay, cool. You know what? Now he is a little bit. So let's work him in there, So you make those adjustments as you go. So and then once I got done dealing with him, I roped it into the other things I thought they were going to be more involved in. And now they are. Now they're like, oh, crap, he was just the beginning. So now it's all making more sense, and I'm getting them kind of where I thought they would be maybe a couple games earlier, but that's where we are.
So I'm going to bring up something that I'd put in your chat during another wisdom check when you had another guest on, and I'd said that at the start of my games, I like to do a recap, but I don't do the recap. I ask each player to recap something from the point of view of their character, and what that tells me is what did that player find interesting from the last game.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Not everybody agreed with that, but I find it helps me to be a better GM, to figure out what missed and what hit, and which of the players liked what.
Yeah, as a GM, I think that's an invaluable tool. I think as an audience, maybe not ideal, because there's going to be a lot that gets missed that the audience maybe honed in on that the players didn't. So maybe a mix in depending on your format. But I do say, man, that is an excellent feedback. I was doing a little bit of that with the Exalted game when we were playing that, and it taught me a lot about what was working and what wasn't. So absolutely true. Before we kind of run out of time here, though, I want to touch back on, you mentioned you'd worked on some World of Darkness stuff. Is there anything in there that really stood out as something that was really important to you from those games?
I'll give you a couple of things. One, that system was a hot mess.
Yeah.
The greatest thing about that system was the sense of story that it brought, and a sense of just cool factor. Let's be perfectly frank here. During that time, vampire was what got more women into gaming than anything else. It was style, it was costuming, it was drama.
It was pre-Twilight.
Yeah, pre-Twilight.
Pre-Twilight. Just
not that we didn't have women before then, but that was an apex moment. That vampire really brought a lot more to our hobby because of that. For me, Changeling, it's the one my group did some play testing on. Changeling to me was a metaphor of gamers, just straight out a metaphor of gamers. You had one foot in fantasy and one foot in the real world, and when the real world took over too much, you just shattered, you broke that part of your soul that was about story and about gaming, just gone. And it was just a sad metaphor of being a gamer, an aging gamer growing up,
Cool. And Arcadia was that door where someday you could do it as a profession.
Yeah, that didn't work out for most people, but yeah.
Most characters never made it to Arcadia either. That was the dream that died over the course of your character's existence. Like,
well, no, see now our kitty is that old folks home that caters to the gamers.
That's right. Yeah, now
I'm pushing for that.
That
now.
needs to be the name of it. If we ever get this thing created, we have to call it Arcadia.
Mm-hmm.
That actually works on double meanings there.
Yeah.
You could actually have
That's what it's got to be.
That's awesome.
The Arcadia Center for Senior Living.
Yeah, much like Kickstarter is reinvigorating the hobby now by allowing more voices to actually publish and put things out there. I think White Wolf was like just a big shot in the arm of the gaming industry at the time.
Absolutely.
Much like the open game license was as well. I mean, we've been blessed to have these moments where our hobby is just given new life.
That's right.
Yeah, it definitely injected the clubs for sure.
Right.
Like the kind of the younger kind of more outgoing extroverted types. Obviously the goth community got interjected in there massively with vampire. So yeah, it definitely changed what it meant to be a gamer when you came up with that baseline, like who is the gamer. It was a different person now, or it could be people.
It took gaming out of your mother's basement, slinging dice and drinking Mountain Dew with a bunch of introverted friends, to nightclubs.
Yeah,
fashionable, youthful community, vibrant and alive community. I mean, that was like that was just like a 180. And
but even conceptually, it was very different. Like when you're just, we talk about this a lot, but just the terms, like storyteller. Like we were supposed to be talking about a story. Oh,
it's still the only system I've seen, I think, that uses ST as the designation for the person running the game. Still the only one to this day.
Yeah, there's a lot of game masters. There's a lot
of game masters,
dungeon masters. There's
let's not forget keeper of secrets,
keeper, dungeon keeper. Yeah,
referee. And those terms, I mean, they seem like they don't make a difference, but I think they actually do. I think that it really kind of sets a tone for your group and for the person running the game. Like what the expectations are. Like what you can be doing. When somebody says, I am the referee, okay, that's a very different thing than storyteller.
I think that it shows the intent of the developer. I don't know if the words have a lot of meaning difference. I don't feel like people DMing are running a lot of dungeons. I think they're GMing most games. Even people using D&D, they're still GMing most games. Very few dungeon masters are mastering dungeons. Yeah, they're mostly mastering the game itself.
Yeah, when you think of dungeon mastering, though, there's kind of a connotation of defeat the players.
I don't know if I see that with dungeon mastering either, though.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, you watch most 5e games; no one's defeating their players. They're
Well, I agree with the modern interpretations of Dungeons and Dragons.
I'm saying I'm not sure those terms have held up over time, and that I think they're pretty interchangeable anymore. But I think it shows the intent.
There was a time and place where that was the thing. I mean, killer dungeons were. Yep. Yeah, you went to a Gen Con to play the newest Death Breakfast. There were a lot of hosts that would they would take 50 people at a time because your character's going to last 2 rounds and then you were out.
Dungeon Crawl Classics or Dark Trails is kind of one of those systems.
Yeah. But even there were times when it was seen as an antagonistic, GM versus player. The players are trying to outsmart and to avoid whatever the GM had planned. I mean, I think it changed over time, certainly. But there was a time that was a thing.
And I think that's a lot of where the struggle comes in, where players immediately try to make sure they're not on the rail. Because the rail was death.
Yeah.
So as long as you weren't on the rail, you were going to live.
Yeah.
So the idea of, let's go over the mountain to the left instead of into the cave immediately became it's almost like when you see that part in Lord of the Rings where they try to go over the mountain and it's too snowy and they have to turn around and come back. Like that was the GM just being like, nah, you fuckers, come down to my dungeon. Get down there in my dungeon. I got a Balrog. I've been planning this thing for weeks. Get your butts down there. This thing's going down. Figure out my puzzle. Get in the door. Let's do this. You can almost see how that was happening out, right? So it is interesting, but at the same time, I feel like that's where it kind of all started, was that the tracks were death.
Yeah. I mean, there was a time there with games like Rolemaster, Neverworld was another one. If given enough time, I could name off dozens, I'm sure, where there were so many rules, because they wanted a sense of fairness between the players and the GM. So the GM could just not make a ruling that would kill a player. There'd be a rule for everything, so that there was the expectation that the GM was the engine. You are the game engine. We have a set of rules, and we know you're not going to screw us just because you want to.
And I feel like that is the mentality that has taken on, regardless of what the initials are that you give them in any system. I feel like that's the norm. I feel like getting people to actually do STing, like World of Darkness style, is still a bit of a stretch that you have to like kind of pull people towards more. It doesn't just happen because they pick up a book and see the word. Like, it's a mentality that you have to get them to adopt and to do. And that part, for me, it took LARP to get to that point, to understand it fully. And we talked about LARP with Malice a couple weeks ago, but I know for me, that's what it took for me to make that jump.
Well, it's trust, right? Like, you have to trust in your storyteller, your GM, or whatever you want to call it, that they're not out to kill you, that they're there for you to have a good time, to tell a good story together. So if there's not that trust, you have to have this extreme set of rules to imply a level of trust.
Levi, our DM, he'll tell you, like, he doesn't rarely have to talk about it, because he's always like, yeah, well, I know you're good with whatever I decide to do. I'm like, yeah, whatever you want to do, man, just let me know. This thing's going to be awesome by the time it's done. He cuts off my character's left arm at the elbow. I'm like, let's do this. What am I going to do now, Levi? Like, is there a negative for casting spells? Sure enough, there is. All right, let's do this. Like, not worried at all. It'll be great. Yeah,
the destination will eventually be fun, even if it's tragic.
It'll be fun when it's all said and done. Everyone will remember it.
Why would anyone, for instance, play a Call of Cthulhu game? The odds are against you. More than likely you're going to die. But that's fun.
That was always interesting about World of Darkness to a degree. The characters, really, compared to hit points, were fragile.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're not as fragile as some games like Zweihander, but fragile. Yeah. So
it changes your outlook on the game, and I do think that is a big thing that games evolve through. Trust, and like even Air Laser's saying in the chat here that she was convinced for her first couple sessions, and both her gaming group and she in particular are all new players, so she was convinced that they were trying to kill her, like the DM was out to just dick her over. And I think a lot of people come into it with that thought in their head, when they initially sit down, because most people are used to antagonistic games. You're playing versus somebody, you're beating something. Everything that we come across is always framed in a us versus them kind of mentality. And then you come into a tabletop game and you go, nope, that's not what this is. I'm creating a world for you to play in, and there's gonna be some things that go wrong, but I hope you make it.
Yeah. For me, it's always about, and this is a total World of Darkness background coming out more than the D&D one. It's always, what can I push my players to do morally and ethically? Right now, I have my characters in Terror and Treefall debating on whether they can ritually sacrifice an innocent 8-year-old girl to save the planet.
Man, I love moral choice.
It heavily.
I love throwing extreme moral choice into games, and then just not giving them any input as to whether it was the right choice or not.
Their current backup option was dig up a grave of a 10-year-old boy so they could talk to the spirit of the dead and figure out what they were going to do. That was their current backup plan. Yeah. So, their level of choices right now are not great. So I always like to see how far into the behind the 8 ball I can put them, and then see if they can find their way back out from it.
Yeah. No, and that's just different types of challenges. The player, all that.
One of the games we're running right now is Dresden Files. We're using Fate Accelerated system, and the way I've got the game set up, it's based in the 1980s, and we have 2 sets of characters for each player. One we call the power character, which is a mover and shaker in the community, somebody who makes the laws, right? And then their player character, who ends up doing the dirty work of the council.
Oh, interesting.
So our first game with the players, one of the player characters had a player that was a priest, had some power in the community, and one of the characters was a red court vampire. Okay. Now, they all had to work a piece out. The game's based in Alaska. It's a barren place. They've got to be able to keep each other in check. Mm-hmm. So they have to work out a deal, and the deal ends up being that the red court can't hunt but one day a year. In return, The priest can't proselytize except once a year.
Oh, nice.
And having them hash out the that bargain between them, it was just a beautiful thing. It's just a beautiful thing at the table.
Yeah, I love those organic moments.
Those are fantastic.
So we are actually heading into our second hour here. So it is time to talk about where people can find you and get all of your stuff plugged out there as much as we possibly humanly can.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and share some of your information for the chat again and make sure they know where you are.
Sure. Well, I'm on Simplecasts, so it's of Steam, Steal, and Murder at simplecast.com. It's easier to go to bluemagic.com, BLUMAGIK, which will get you there directly. Word of warning, as this podcast is more than 10 years old, if you start with the very early episodes, you will obviously hear how the technology has changed over time.
It's like going back to watch an old movie, right?
Yeah, black and whites, let me tell you. There's some great gameplay in there, but they're a little hard to listen to. I'm on the Twitters. I'm on Facebook. If you go to that bluemagic.com, you'll have all my links at the top left. Many various ways you can get a hold of us. We've got a Discord channel, and we still, anyone that's interested in playing the game, just shout out. We'd love to have you in. We play all kinds of games. I am not the only game master. I'm usually the primary one, but we have other game masters in the channel too. So if you're just looking for a pickup game, there are certainly people there willing to oblige.
That's fantastic. And definitely make sure that you're putting that out on our Discord as well, which was linked down here, because there are a lot of people in our Discord that are looking for games. There's a whole section in there for looking for groups. So if you're an audience member tonight and you're looking for a game, or if you're somebody in the podcast later looking for that, we'll definitely have a link to our Discord in all of our podcasts and stuff. Go on there, check it out, see if you can find a game. It's a good opportunity to find other gamers out there. Like you said before, expand that circle and get your tribe together and, have some really good game experiences. And yep, there it is. There's a link for bluemagic.com there. So thank you,
Air Laser, Mod of the Century.
Absolutely. And as she is doing so far, she is plugging all of our content. So I guess
all of our content out there.
So we currently have a stream team that we're part of, and that includes a number of really friendly people, including Air Laser, our mod. So check her out. She does a variety show. She does a lot of video games. I think she's doing mostly Tomb Raider stuff these days. But she also does a Dungeons & Dragons game on Friday nights. They're doing a module right now, and it is fantastic. So go check that out. We're also in a group with Grouch Couch. So if you're interested in a very festive atmosphere, we're going to get out there, do some partying, have a good time, lots of fan interaction. If you want to have an impact on what's going on the scene, that's the place to go.
And if you want to have impact, this Sunday's game is session 0 for season 4. You can help them build their characters. You can decide what's in the deck of many things that you can then make them draw from at random throughout the game. All that sort of player interaction stuff, all those things a lot of it gets decided here up front, even in this Sunday session. So show up, help them decide what their characters are, give them flaws, give them random things that they want to add to the deck every year. They keep adding every season, they add more cards to the deck. So show up this weekend and help them put more fun stuff that they have to do, and they will do it, every bit of it. So
yeah, absolutely, along with a lot of drinking.
Yes, they will.
Let's see. So we also got the Liching Hour as in our stream team. He does a lot of really fascinating things, a lot of creative things that most of the channels aren't doing. He's putting together story narratives around single player games. It's like card games. He's also demonstrating a lot of games that are new. So if you're interested in up and coming games, if you're looking at things that have just been funded recently and that sort of thing, he does a lot of those on his stream, and you can get a taste for a lot of really interesting content. And he also makes his own little videos, that go to kind of assist Grouch Couch's performances. So lots of these really hilarious scenes that he's putting together, and you get to do the behind the scenes, watching him, do the audio and video formatting,
the video editing.
And it's actually fucking hilarious. So go check that out. And then we also have newcomers in our group, Dragons in the Dining Room. They have a D&D stream as well. I've caught a little bit of it, but not a ton of it, so I don't know a ton about their current campaign necessarily, but they're pretty interesting. And they also have a talk show earlier in the night here on Monday nights. So if you like this
Dragon's Discourse
right now, go check that out. And then you can get double your helpings. So yeah, very lengthy, awesome Monday. So we also have a YouTube channel. So if you're looking for other ways to get content from our channel, you will see all kinds of stuff on there. Currently, we have all of our episodes of the Wisdom Check on there. And we also have all of Terror and Tree Fell on there. We're working on getting 7 Days to Die on there. We're going to be getting all the Bardic Knowledge stuff. Actually, that's already on there currently. We're also working on getting the Everstorm, which is our 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game that we'll be playing this weekend, I believe, on the 22nd. So definitely check us out there, and hopefully we'll have some of those videos out on the YouTube channel as well, which you can see the link for that is in our chat currently. God, you want to take over some of this stuff, Dustin?
Yeah, I'm going to fill in all the holes that you guys left behind. You're horrible. You're killing my soul here. First off,
Check out the Notorious DMG.
you can also find Bert along with me and newcomer the Liching Hour in Notorious DMG, where we play all sorts of tabletop RPGs. In the month of April, when Terror and Tree Fell ends, I'm going to be running a 1, maybe 2-shot game of Werewolf the Apocalypse, which Bert here, I believe, is signing on to be one of my players. And maybe the only one who has any experience in the World of Darkness at all. So he may become pack leader just by default. I'm reading back through the book, putting together a 1-shot Pentex facility raid. It's going to be a good time. The guys are getting hyped for it, getting them in there. In the meantime, Notorious DMG TV is the name of the Twitch channel. You can find Notorious DMG also on Twitter, where it's a group of dungeon masters, again, who wanted to be players more, so they all binded together and they run. Oh, man. What's that list of games you got up there, Bert? It's like 17 games or something. Bert's like, I'm going to run a bunch of games. He just listed them. Like, more games I've ever seen my whole life. Like, it's ridiculous. Second announcement, because it happened today, one of the members of the Grouch Couch, Fishy, his daughter was born today. So congratulations, Fishy, on your new arrival. Hope you and the wife doing well. And
grow your game table right there.
Right. Congratulations. That is freaking awesome news.
We saw a picture. I didn't see a names, but congratulations to Fishy.
Make sure you guys spam that on Discord. Let them know you said hi, because that's great news.
Here on Tabletop to Keyboard, we are still full steam ahead with all of our content. And boy, we really expanded. Tomorrow, 8 p.m. Central Time, if Cameron is over the flu, we'll have Bardic Knowledge, where he's going to make game music live right here on stream. You can watch him explain to you how music works. If you're someone who's completely musically illiterate like me, you still won't fully understand it. But it's awesome to watch it happen. He makes it there live, and it's an amazing process to watch take place. It gives you so much more respect for what musicians actually do. Like, you think it's easy, right? But you watch him do it, and it's amazing how much work goes into it. Wednesday, me, Cameron, Clint, Tim, Jeff, Levi. Right, Levi? You still there? He better be. We're playing 7 Days to Die. So 10 p.m. Wednesday, you'll find another 2-ish hour session of 7 Days to Die, where this bunker for the next Horde night is put together by Levi. Levi can't even tell textures in that game. His computer is so bad. We're doomed. They thought they were doomed when it was my turn. Just wait till this bunker comes up. So we'll have to see how that's going along coming Wednesday. This Thursday is not Terror and Tree Fell. This Thursday, though, correct me if I'm wrong, Bert, you're on Zweihander RPG playing some Zweihander. You're in Blood, Sweat, and Laudanum, right?
I am.
That's right.
Beautiful ogre you will ever meet.
I know Bert's schedule almost better than he does. So they're Thursday on Zweihander RPG. Again, my promotional ads have them listed still as Grim and Perilous Gaming. I will get that updated. They rechanged the name of their channel to Zweihander RPG. So if Matt's out there, I'll make sure I get that changed in our promotional stuff I put out. Friday, we don't have anything Friday. And Saturday, though, we're back for Everstorm.
Mm-hmm.
And then next week is C2E2.
That's right.
And
we're doing a panel of C2E2.
We're doing a panel on how to homebrew your game. So if you're coming to C2E2, if you got badges, I don't have the room number in front of me, but it's Saturday evening. Mm-hmm. There'll be a room where we're in, and I've seen some of the presentation. It's looking pretty good. Mm-hmm. So you come, we're going to teach you some tips and tricks on how to homebrew your game so that you don't have to live in module hell forever.
Shots fired.
I really want Levi to put that as the tagline underneath there. How to homebrew, don't live in module hell forever is pretty much what I want to be under there.
Or how
if I don't die from the plague
forever.
I'll be back with Terra and Treefell a week from this Thursday with Chapter 9, No Place for Heroes.
That is a lot of fun going on right there.
A ton.
So we got a lot going on. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm glad we have an audience that is looking for more content because we're happy to provide. So once again, I want to say thank you so very much, Bert. I appreciate you coming on the channel and having a little chat with us here, sharing what you know. And, thanks to the audience for keeping with us here. It's been fantastic. So who do we have on next week, Dustin?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that. And I knew the answer about 5 seconds ago.
That's right. I waited until I saw it go out.
You know what I did? I started to look at who we were going to raid, and I forgot who was on next week. Next week, we have GKG Allen, who is the guy behind Tiny Dungeon Super Systems, who is another member of Notorious DMG. He's going to make his way on here with us. We're going to talk about some Tiny Dungeons.
Nice.
You play some Tiny Dungeons, Bert?
Yeah, and some Tiny Cthulhu coming up soon. Look at that. Tiny Cthulhu coming up
Tiny
soon.
Cthulhu? Yeah. Oh, man. Well, I'm sure we'll hear a lot about that next week.
We're going to have to figure out a lot about it next week. It's going to be interesting. So who are we rating tonight?
Well, I don't know, because I just looked at who was on next week. Jeff,
I'm just trying to put you on the spot.
You're doing a good job tonight.
Tonight, I have been teeing it up left, right, and center just to make sure it's interesting for the audience.
I thought this was a professional group. Don't you have a guy for this?
I am the guy for this. This is my job around here.
I just throw Dustin into the weeds.
Let's rate us a Scuzz Nugget. He's not doing anything D&D related tonight, but we'll rate us a Scuzz Nugget.
All right. Scuzz Nugget
on here, and I'll make that happen.
All right. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you. It's been fun.